few years ago, I was in this very ashram. And I was walking to my room, and I met a woman on the path. And she was walking with a walker. And I went to walk around her, and she took the walker and went like that. And I stopped and I looked up at her, and she said, I saw you in that movie, What the Bleat. I said, oh, thanks. And I went to go around there, and she said, I don't think you can help me to heal myself. I said, so be it. And I went to go around there, and she said, but I came all this way to listen to you talk. I said, okay. You want to walk with me? And she was very upset because she needed special conditions, a special room, special treatment. And she was the type of person that was very attractive. She was well-groomed, and you wouldn't think that there was anything wrong with her. But I made my way to the picnic tables with her, and she told me that she had a condition called polycystic fibrodysplasia. Now, polycystic fibrodysplasia is a genetic condition, and once the gene is signaled, most of the time, the doctors will tell you that you're going to live with it the rest of your life. Now, what polycystic fibrodysplasia is the gene turns on in the bone, and when the gene turns on in the bone, it starts to make a very cheap protein. And because of that, the bone loses its scaffolding, it loses its structure, and the side effect of that is spontaneous fractures. Now, this is a 38-year-old woman, and she's had 17 fractures in her femur. First time she realized she had a broken bone, she limped around the high school campus for 1 year, and it never occurred to her to get an x-ray because she didn't have a trauma. So then she went to a series of doctors. I think it was about 8 or 9 doctors, and all the doctors wanted to put a pin in her leg. But the last doctor she saw said, if you put a pin in your leg, then it could break below the pin or above the pin, and you're going to have multiple surgeries, and the bones are going to get more weak. So she decided not to have the surgery, and she went to all these specialists, and they did all these type of injections, but she kept having fractures. And she used to weigh her groceries, because if the groceries were too heavy, she was afraid that she was going to have a fracture. Now, it required her having special attention. She needed to have a special cargo elevator to go up and down hotels, and she needed special ways to get to bed, and she had all these special conditions. She didn't want to stand in line, and she was difficult to be around because she had to control everything in her environment. Now, when she was a child, her father was abusive. And her father would come home a few times a week and beat his children. Now, children's brainwaves, the first 2 years of their life, they're in delta. They're asleep with their eyes open. From the ages of 2 to 6, your brainwaves change into theta. And so we could say that for the first 6 years of a child's life, all the information that they're experiencing from their environment is going into the subconscious unedited. It's encoding. And because most of the time children have all of their attention on their inner world, when they have an experience and they feel differently chemically or emotionally, they wake up and pay attention to who's causing it. In her case, this was her father. And so in time, she began to anticipate these events. And it was those highly charged emotional events, the emotions of fear and anxiety and pain and suffering and anger and aggression. All of those emotions of guilt are created from the stress hormones. And the stress hormones push the genetic buttons that create disease. So over a series of exposures to the same violence, and then the vigilance and worry that the future was going to happen again, as she began to think about the event happening again, she began to produce the same emotion before the event occurred. and she was knocking her brain and body out of balance by thought alone. And her body, as the unconscious mind, was living in the future based on the past. And it was the continuous emotional state that began to push the genetic button that created her disease of polycystic fibrodysplasia. In other words, she manifested weakness. She manifested vulnerability in her bones, biologically. And so now she comes to some of our workshops after she leaves this beautiful place. And she was very difficult as a person. My staff cringed when they saw her. And she walked with a walker, and she was angry, and she needed special attention and special food and special this and special that. All of it because she wanted to control her environment, because she was afraid if she was out of control, what would happen. And she came to event after event after event. Every single time I noticed when she came, she walked a little differently. Within a year, she was walking with a cane, and she caught my attention. 9 months later, I see her not walking with a cane at all. A few months after that, she's bouncing around, walking with everybody with no cane at all. And she approaches me and she said, I just came from my specialist. And, of course, this is the most common thing people say. You're not going to believe this. The specialist took an x-ray of where the fractures were in my femur, and they can't even find any evidence of any fractures. Now, your genes make proteins. Your body's a protein-producing machine. And every single day, she made the decision that she would not get up from her meditation the same person who sat down. She was going to get up, falling in love with life. For no apparent reason, she was going to surrender her bitterness and her resentment and begin to teach her body emotionally what it would feel like to have a wonderful life. And every day, she turned the battleship around, and she was knocking on the genetic door, because emotions, powerful, elevated emotions, begin to signal new genes in new ways, turning on different Christmas tree lights, which make new proteins. So at the end of that period where there was no evidence of fractures, I knew her body was moving out of the past. And we had an advanced workshop, and she showed up, and she came up to me and she said, I went for my test and my markers are elevated. What is wrong? She said, I should be getting better. There's no evidence of a fracture, but my blood values show the disease is active. And I grabbed her and I pulled her in close and I said, your body's living in the past. It hasn't caught up. Keep crossing the river. Come on, keep crossing the river. And she went back into her life. She continued to change the way she spoke. She continued to change the way she acted. She no longer wanted any special attention. She no longer allowed those emotions to bring her to a lower level. And she said, every day I'm going to give thanks for life, and I'm going to get up as if my prayers are already answered. And the emotional signature of gratitude means the event has already occurred. And she was teaching her body emotionally what it would feel like. All of a sudden, we get this email. And of course, the first line of the email is, you're not going to believe this. She said, I went to my doctors at Mount Sinai Hospital. I was so happy with myself. I was so in love with life. I was so satisfied with who I was that I walked in there, peed in the cup, they took my blood, I gave thanks for it, I walked out of there, I could care less if I had the disease. I felt so whole, so complete, that I didn't care if I had the disease any longer. And a week later, they called her up and they said to her, you are normal. But she was no longer the identity that was connected to her disease. She was no longer living in her past. The fear, the emotion, no longer kept her there. And she said to me, my disease and my father treating me that way was my greatest teacher, because I am no longer living by those emotions. And I said to her, memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. And that's the name of the game here. And so I was in Baltimore, Washington, D.C. a few months ago, and I said to her, hey, you want to stand up in front of the audience? She had come to the event, and tell the audience the story so that they could hear that's possible. You know what she said to me? She said, I don't even remember the story. I don't even remember that person. You see, the personality that she was in that moment was a different personality. The disease existed in the old self, in the old personality. She literally became someone else. And every single day, because it took years to signal the gene to create the disease, she was passionate about it every day. She understood what she was doing. She assigned meaning to it, and she changed who she was. And I have read hundreds of stories of people that have healed themselves of all kinds of conditions. And I can tell you, over and over again, it's the same theme. They reach a point where they're so whole, they're so happy with themselves, they're so in love with life, that they could care less if they have the disease. And that's the moment it goes away. So then, we shouldn't wait for our healing to feel whole. We shouldn't wait for our success to feel empowered. We shouldn't wait for our new lover to feel love. We shouldn't wait for our money to show up to feel abundance. We shouldn't wait for the mystical moment to feel awe. That's the old model of reality of cause and effect. Waiting for something outside of you to change how you feel inside of you. The Newtonian model of reality. The quantum model of reality is about causing effects, which means then you have to feel awe for the mystical moment to find you. You have to feel empowered for your success to show up. You have to feel abundance to be wealthy. You have to feel whole for your healing to occur, and you have to be in love before your lover ever shows up. That is the quantum model of reality of causing and effect. Thanks.